First, let me take this opportunity to thank my colleagues, particularly those traveling afar, for deeming this issue important enough to be here. In order for us to accomplish some of our successes that impacted Philadelphia in the past, we could not have done so with support. So to each of you, I say thank you. Let me start by just saying that last session, when the city began its efforts to implement the Actual Value Initiative, also known as AVI, the General Assembly passed Senate Bill 1301 that was introduced by State Senator Tony Williams to delay implementation of the plan for 1 year and provide homestead relief that has been available to all other Pennsylvania homeowners to those in the city of Philadelphia. We also passed legislation as amended by Senator Williams that allowed the city to adjust the school district property tax rates in connection with the new tax rates to be issued to prevent a large unintended tax increase for all Philadelphia property owners. And with that in mind, we recognize that there was still more work to be done. The tax relief package that we are going to address today consists of 4 issues that we were trying to tackle. The first is tax delinquency. The second is a constitutional amendment authorizing tax rates on 2 classes of property, commercial and residential. The third, periodic installment payment options, and the final, relief for long-term owner occupants. Now, for those of you who know me as chair of the Philadelphia delegation, prior to being elected, I worked in the City Council of Philadelphia since the tender age of 17. I started as an intern for 5 years and then worked for 10 years as a senior staffer. I will tell you that when we started to work on this bill, I had never seen the kind of close working relationship that had been established with the Philadelphia delegation in the General Assembly, along with the City of Philadelphia. That was because the leadership of the Philadelphia City Council President, Councilman L.Clarke, members of his staff who worked with us hand and foot in the crafting of this package, along with the support of the mayor and his administration, along with the SRC, in which the 3 of them came together in a manner that I thought was extremely unprecedented to note the need to pass the bills that I've already mentioned, 1301 and 1303, but they committed to working to support the package that we are here to discuss today. I think I see the council president in the audience, and just for the record, want to note thank you for allowing us to make history. People say I like utopia. I'm going to keep it going as long as I can. Kumbaya. So we want to start with the first panel. And the panel from the Pew Charitable Trust will include Susan Warner. She's the officer of the Philadelphia Research Initiative, and Emily Dowdle, Senior Associate, the Philadelphia Research Initiative. If you are here, and just please introduce yourselves for the record.
I'm Susan Warner, officer at the Pew Philadelphia Research Initiative.
And I'm Emily Dowdle, Senior Associate at the Philadelphia Research Initiative.
Thank you. So even if you have prepared remarks, if you choose to read them, it is fine. If you would like to summarize them and sort of highlight issues that you deem extremely important for us to get on the record, feel free to do so. I do during these hearings, although I know we're being recorded by PCN, you don't usually see a stenographer here, but we requested a stenographer because of the significance and importance of this hearing and us to be able to use all of the information that you give us on the record in our efforts to work through the legislative process in Harrisburg. So I just wanted to note that for the record.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to share our research. My name is Susan Warner, and I'm with the Philadelphia Research Initiative, which is a small research group within the Pew Charitable Trust. We are not an advocacy organization. We do independent, nonpartisan studies of important issues here in Philadelphia. Our director, Larry Eichel, could not be here today, and he sends his regrets. Last fall, we published a report called The Actual Value Initiative, Overhauling Property Taxes in Philadelphia. For this report, we looked at property tax policy in Philadelphia and 7 other large cities that have undergone some kind of a property tax transformation. The report is available at our site, pewtrust.org, under Our Work, along with some additional studies related to taxes, schools, and other topics. So I'll start by giving an overview of AVI and some of the background drawn from our report. For decades, Philadelphia's property tax system has been criticized as outdated and unfair. But this spring, City Council is expected to adopt a major overhaul of the city's property tax assessments as part of what is called the Actual Value Initiative, or AVI. AVI would transform property taxation in Philadelphia in three significant ways. One, it would change the certified value of city properties following a sweeping door-to-door reassessment of all 579,000 plus properties in Philadelphia. This is the first time in decades, perhaps ever, that the city has conducted a proper real estate reassessment. Two, it would eliminate the practice of fractional assessment, which sets the ratio of assessed to fair market value of properties at 32%. AVI will make the taxable value 100% of market value. Three, AVI is likely to include some ways to shield certain homeowners from large tax increases. Research shows that in recent years, no large city has tackled this degree of change to its property tax system all at one time. Property tax transformations on this scale in other jurisdictions have come as the result of court orders and state mandates. Philadelphia is doing this on its own. Efforts to change the property tax in Philadelphia go back more than 30 years, and in looking at the experience of other cities, we found that it is difficult politically to change property tax systems anywhere. Compared to sales or wage taxes, property taxes can seem much more subjective and confusing. Beyond that, people have different views on what exactly is even fair. Since it's not based on the ability to pay, the property tax can seem unfair to long-time residents in neighborhoods that suddenly rise in value, particularly for retirees or others living on a fixed income. But even though it's hard, many other jurisdictions have managed to create successful property tax systems, relatively fair and equitable. We found that Philadelphia's inability to do so lies partly with the state and partly with the city itself. Our research shows that comprehensive property tax restructuring in other cities was largely driven by state-level actions and legislation. That's not been the case in Pennsylvania, and this has had a major effect on Philadelphia's efforts to confront inequitable property assessments. We identified two major obstacles at the state level. First is a lack of statewide assessment standards. Pennsylvania is one of 9 states that do not impose regular reassessment timetables or standard assessment methods on local governments. In other states, assessments have to be done somewhere in a range of 1 to 6 years. Pennsylvania also is one of just three states to receive a grade of F in standardized procedure, Council on State Taxation, which is a Washington-based trade group. Our neighbors Delaware and New York were the other two. Unlike other states, Pennsylvania does not have a state agency that oversees the assessment process and can order local governments to reassess when values fall out of line. We do have the State Tax Equalization Board, which monitors assessed values to allocate state funding for schools, and it can provide a basis for assessment appeals and lawsuits, but it cannot actually force counties to reassess. Without a requirement for periodic assessments, counties can put it off, and the longer they go, the more potential sticker shock comes with the correction, as we are seeing in many neighborhoods throughout Philadelphia today. A second important factor at the state level is the uniformity clause in the Pennsylvania state constitution. Other states have similar clauses, but the Pennsylvania courts have had a very strict interpretation of uniformity. In Pennsylvania, property owners must be taxed the same whether they own a row house or an office tower. In other states, uniformity is required only within subclasses of property. The interpretation here effectively limits how much local lawmakers can tailor to meet changing policy goals. In most other cities, officials can create different classifications of property and therefore can, to a degree, shift the tax burden away from residential taxpayers who are, after all, voters, or toward commercial property owners. That helps make reassessments more politically palatable. In addition to the obstacles to change at the state level, we also found 3 local characteristics that contribute to the city's current property tax situation. First, among the cities we studied, Philadelphians pay the lowest property taxes per capita. Property tax here generates only a quarter of the amount it does in Washington. Overall, wage and profits taxes make up the largest share of the city's general revenue fund, 3 times as much as property taxes. As a result, there tends to be less focus here on property tax revenue, and it's been easier to put reassessments off. A second local obstacle to change is generally low overall property valuations in the city, below even the official 32% ratio. As a result, few Philadelphians have had reason to think they are being overtaxed, even those who are paying more than their fair share when compared to their neighbors. Finally, Philadelphia has a high percentage of owner-occupied homes, the highest of the cities we examined. Slightly more than half of all homes are owner-occupied, and that figure has been even higher in the recent past. Local officials obviously don't want to alienate this large community. Also, many homeowners in the city are of modest means, and politicians are reluctant to do anything that would hurt them financially. Renters rarely complain about property taxes since they do not pay them directly. They're folded into their rent. Our report has a lot of detail on the long history of attempts to change the system that for one reason or another have failed over the years. But I'd like to take a moment to turn the focus towards the future. Enacting AVI will be difficult politically, but simply putting it in place will not be enough to guarantee success long term. The new system will require an ongoing effort and commitment of resources if the city is to prevent its property tax system from falling back into the same condition it is in today. A report commissioned by the Pennsylvania Legislative Budget and Finance Committee looked at 14 counties that had met uniformity and equality standards through reassessment. But just 3 years later, more than half the counties no longer met those standards. In our report, we identify 3 key elements to bear in mind going forward. First is regular reassessments. By law, the city's Office of Property Assessments, the OPA, is supposed to conduct annual reassessments. Going door to door every year is impossible. An OPA can use some new information technologies to keep assessments close to market value. However, we found that successful systems also have requirements to gather street-level data on a regular timetable. Second, OPA will require sufficient funding. Maintaining assessments is expensive. The city has already made a big investment in the current reassessment, and if there are not enough resources to maintain the quality of those assessments, all the effort put in over the past years could go to waste. Third, our research suggests that city officials would be well advised to continue efforts to educate the public about assessments and develop transparent measures that will allow taxpayers to gauge whether they are paying more or less than they should, and to understand the true costs of programs designed to provide tax relief. So City Council and the Nutter administration have some work ahead of them this spring. In addition to making sure assessments are accurate, they have to strike a policy balance among goals that might conflict, such as protecting those who face much higher assessments, keeping the overall tax rate at a politically acceptable level, and raising enough revenue to finance essential city services and the school district. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Emily Dowdell, who will discuss some of the policy options to mitigate the impact of AVI, the focus of the legislation you're considering today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. As the City of Philadelphia has moved forward with AVI, one of the central questions of the discussion has been, how do you protect property owners who may get steep tax increases as a result of the reforms? This is a crucial issue, and like the task of property tax assessment itself, it is complex. One of the most important things for policymakers and taxpayers alike to keep in mind is that if revenue is to stay flat, and city officials promise that it will, every measure that reduces property taxes for one group will make the tax rate on everyone go up. So this means that there will be increases in the bills for everyone not qualified for a given program, and it could raise the bills for some people who do qualify. And I'll touch on that again later. This is the old squeezing the balloon analogy. I'd like to start by reviewing some of the programs that are already in place. These are targeted programs that serve a limited number of people, and they're likely to remain a part of any tax relief package. First, there are programs that limit property tax liabilities based on income, and they're known in the field as circuit breakers. That's because they switch off taxes at a certain threshold. National experts are fans of these types of measures because they address one of the key complaints about property taxes, which is that they're not based on the ability to pay. In Philadelphia, the Revenue Department administers a property tax freeze for low-income seniors, as well as some low-income widows and widowers. As long as people meet the income requirement, their property tax bills do not go up, regardless of changes in tax rates or assessments. In 2011, some 13,000 Philadelphia property owners participated in the program at a cost to the city of $4.1 million in foregone revenue. A separate state program financed by the lottery provides property tax rebate checks of up to $650 a year for the elderly, the disabled, and widowed spouses earning less than $35,000. Since the cost of living is higher in Philadelphia than in most of the state grants a supplemental rebate of up to $325 to eligible city residents. In 2011, about 42,000 Philadelphia homeowners received a total of $17.2 million in rebates, and about 30,000 of them also got the supplements. The program also pays rebates to renters who earn less than $15,000 per household. Nearly 34,000 Philadelphia renters received rebate payments, totaling $19.1 million. I should mention that Philadelphia also has a rebate program for all active duty reserve and National Guard members, which is pretty common around the country. The next program I'll talk about is installments. Most homeowners have mortgages, and for many of them, the property tax is part of their monthly payment, so it's divided into 12 payments. But Philadelphia has a high percentage of homeowners with no mortgage, 40% of them all told. And this group is generally on the hook for the entire tax bill at once. The city has realized that this can be a problem and allows low-income homeowners to break the annual tab into smaller payments spread out over the year. In 2011, 17,000 homeowners took part. Installment programs are appealing because they don't change the amount of revenue collected or who is paying it, so there's no balloon effect. Finally, there are deferrals. This program is essentially a loan from the city to cover increased tax bills if those bills go up by 15% or more in a single year. A lien is placed on the property and interest accrues at 6% annually. All of it, the back taxes and interest, is collected when the house is sold or inherited. But in Philadelphia, the program has not had a single participant. And deferrals aren't very popular in other cities either. City Council has discussed lowering the interest rate to make them more attractive. In addition to those measures, the city is also moving forward with the homestead exemption, which is already authorized by the state legislature. That will knock $30,000 off the taxable value of all owner-occupied homes. Homesteads are pretty common, offered in 19 states and DC, and in a way, the homestead is a way to give homeowners a break without violating the uniformity clause in Pennsylvania. Because most homestead programs, including the one in the works here, offer a discount based on a fixed dollar figure, they are progressive. And by that I mean that they give a bigger percentage discount to homes that are of lesser value than to homes of greater value. The planned homestead represents a 30% reduction for a home worth $100,000, but only a 10% reduction for a home worth $300,000. Furthermore, touching back for a moment on what I said earlier, because the homestead program will cause the tax rate to be higher across the city, some people in more expensive homes may wind up paying more with the homestead than they would have if the city didn't enact it at all. Go over the proposals that have brought us here today. First, there's a bill to be introduced by Representative Parker that aims to help the city get tough on tax delinquents. This is part of a bigger picture response to a common complaint from people who do pay their taxes, that the city just isn't doing enough to collect from those who don't pay. Going after delinquencies is both a way to seek more total revenue and a way to make the system more fair by ensuring that everyone is paying in. The subject has been getting a lot of attention, essentially because people who expect to pay a lot more under AVI are demanding it. Making headway on delinquency might make new values easier to swallow. Second, there's a bill to be introduced by Representative McGeehan which would expand the existing installment program by enabling the city to remove the current income limits. This would not affect the amount of revenue collected, so would not impact the tax rate. Then there was a proposed change to the enabling legislation for long-time owner-occupant relief, which is also known as gentrification relief, from Representative O'Brien. There has been a lot of interest in such a program because the biggest bill increases are expected in neighborhoods where prices have gone up rapidly and where there's still many long-time residents who are of modest means. In general, these kinds of programs are rare, partly because they're so tricky to design. How do you target them, and how do you limit the lost revenue? This proposal would help officials target relief through age and income tests. Finally, Representative Brownlee's bill would be the biggest change because it requires a constitutional amendment authorizing 2 property classes. As my colleague mentioned, classification is allowed in many states, and it can help convince homeowners to support a system overhaul by shifting some of the tax burden to business. All 4 proposals represent the kind of policies that lawmakers elsewhere have implemented in efforts to ease the transition to more fair and accurate tax systems. But once again, it's important to bear in mind that any measure that reduces property taxes for one group makes the tax rate on everyone go up. The Philadelphia Research Initiative is not an advocacy organization, so we didn't come here to say we are either for or against any of the proposed legislation. But we were delighted so that we could share our research with you today. So thank you again for inviting us to testify. And for more information, please do look at our report, which was included in your packet. Thank you.
Ladies, thank you so much, but please stay seated at the table, and I want to introduce some of our other colleagues who've arrived. We have Rep. Dom Costa. Can you please stand, Representative, so people can see you? Rep. Nick Kodik. Rep. Joe Procharka. Rep. Maria Donatucci. Rep. Joe Markozik, who also happens to be our Democratic Appropriations Chairman, so thank you, sir, for being here. Rep. Rob Matsey. From Philadelphia, Rep. J.P. Miranda. Also Rep. Jordan Harris. And the chair of our Democratic Policy Committee, Rep. Sterler. And walking in, I see, is that Rep. Sconklin? Rep. So thank you all so much for being here. First question is from Rep. Costa.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Actually, I got a couple comments. I see in your report you make reference to Allegheny County and the mess that it is in. I have to tell you, great advocate and Representative Parker. As you know, whenever a property bill comes up, there's people that want to file amendments and put their information in there. And being from Allegheny County, we had several people that had amendments to this bill, but Representative Parker came over and said, I need help with this. You got to help me out. So if it wasn't for her, that legislation wouldn't have gone through. So for her making sure that everybody was on the same page, and we realized how important it was to her and to Philadelphia. So we helped her out on that. So if it wasn't someone like her advocating for it, our amendments would have stayed on, and who knows what would happen to the bill. Probably would have died. So just wanted to compliment the chairwoman. You did bring up Allegheny County. One of the things you also brought up was a statewide reassessment. Could you talk about that? I know we've done some legislation to try and put that through. We've even had legislative budget and finance bring out a report and said it was the right thing to do, and we still can't get any movement. Is there anything that you can do to help us get some movement on that?
That report was very well done, and did raise some of the same issues that have been, have come up in Pennsylvania for years. So yeah, like we said in our report, that most of the other states we looked at have firm mandates that the local jurisdiction in Pennsylvania, the county, has to abide by, and here it's much softer.
Yeah, this is certainly something that's been difficult in any state that has actually enacted these measures to assure that counties keep up with their assessments. Massachusetts might be the best, it might be the best case study to look at as a place that was able to actually enact reforms. Massachusetts also has some very urban places and some very rural places, just like Pennsylvania does, and I know that across the state, that's one of the main concerns that comes up a lot. So addressing that concern that things that are going to help the urban counties would not be good for rural counties are probably worth addressing, and in Massachusetts, they were able to do so.
Well, again, in Allegheny County, we've been pushing for this for a while because we are the only county in the southwest region that keeps getting reassessed. There's other counties around us that 40 years have passed since they've done their last reassessment. And I know my colleagues that live around us aren't happy about that, but we, and Allie, we're trying to make it fair for everybty. So appreciate you being here today. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. We mentioned earlier the President Clarke, and we'll hear from him later, but I think I also saw Councilman Squilla here. Oh, thank you, Councilman Squilla, for being here. Rep. O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's, if we can. As I'm sure you're aware, Allegheny County was court-ordered assessment. County Executive Fitzgerald directed his agencies not to send out the reassessments. Now, Executive Fitzgerald has been calling for a statewide legislation for reassessment. Also in the mix, we now have 70% of the school districts statewide have done a property tax increase during the Corbett administration as a result of the cuts in funding to education. Now, given this property tax cacophony that we have going on in the Commonwealth, lay out your observations on statewide versus countywide. What happens here? What's more productive? And during the course of your testimony, you kept using the word fair. And it's kind of very interesting because another administration used the same word. I'll speak about that later. But work with us for a little bit here.
Sure. Well, one thing we note in our report is that when it comes to property taxes, there's no one definition of fair. Mm-hmm. That's for certain. I'm sure you are probably aware of the case of California, which is through a voter proposition there, they now set all property taxes at the value of the home when it was bought. That's very unusual, but that's one definition of fairness. And so, it's not really our job to say what exactly is fair when it comes to property taxes. When we talk about statewide assessment, we're not actually saying that an entire assessment is done of the entire state at once, so I should clarify that. It's more that there's some kind of mechanism at the state level that ensures each county is doing their assessments.
Now, being a think tank, I want you to take a second and I want you to think of probably one of the most distressing things that I've seen over the years regarding census data is that income levels of folks leaving Philadelphia has been higher than folks coming into Philadelphia. Now, we have property tax. So if we have a rapid spike in property tax, 500%, think and talk about what does that do to the tax base in general. Not just property tax, but all the taxes that the city and county of Philadelphia take in. What's happening here?
As far as I know, the city is not planning on increasing the amount of revenue it's getting from property taxes this year.
Say that again, please.
The city is not planning on increasing the amount of revenue it gets from property taxes. The revenue is actually staying flat. So the overall mix is staying flat.
Given the sales tax use not, because I mean, the whole trough of tax. So you say that there'll be a zero increase in, or it'll have no impact on it?
That's probably a question for the Director of Finance, but as far as I've seen, they are talking about flat revenue this year.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any other questions from any members? Listen, we want to take this time to thank you so much for your testimony. Again, it is added to the record, and as we move through the legislative process in Harrisburg, we'll be using your testimony to hopefully assist us in that process, and if we need you again, you know we will call you. We will find you.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Our next panel will consist of, panel. He'll be the Lone Ranger today. Philadelphia City Council President, Councilman Darrell Clarke. Councilman Squilla, he needed some help here today, so we're happy you're here. Come join him, please.
I heard you guys don't bite, so
Just please state your name for the record, both of you.
Thank you, Council President Darrell Clarke.
Councilman Mark Squilla.
Thank you, Council President.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, I don't normally read a script or testimony. I traditionally go off the cuff, but my staff members did some great work, and so I will read the script as promised, and hopefully some of this won't be redundant, but I think you cannot emphasize enough the need to do this, so I'll just quickly go through that and be prepared for any questions that you may have relating to this and other matters. First, I would like to say good afternoon to Chairwoman Parker and Chairman Sterla. I don't know Chairman. Okay, pleasure to meet you today. And to all the members of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives Democratic Policy Committee and the members of the Philadelphia delegation of the House of Representatives. For the record, obviously Council President Clarke, I'm here today to reaffirm my support for the package of property tax relief bills that are being introduced by the Philadelphia delegation. On January the 15th, I had the honor to be present and speak at the news conference in Harrisburg when this package was announced. Further, it has been my pleasure to work collaboratively with the delegation in the formation of this legislation. It was last spring when Chairwoman Parker and I decided that there needed to be a working relationship between our delegation in Harrisburg and the City Council, because at the end of the day, we represent the same constituents. From our initial joint meeting to working on legislation to delay AVI this past June to this current package of bills, this partnership, which has included representation from both sides of the aisle, and I want to emphasize that, both sides of the aisle, has been extremely productive and is evidence that we can accomplish more to serve our constituents and we can better work together. One of the most important ways to serve our common constituents is to make sure that they are all treated fairly. And in the world of property tax assessments, it means that everyone's property is valued accurately. It also means we must be sensitive to the fact that some residents will experience substantial and even extraordinary increases in their assessed value. As we make this difficult and unprecedented transition to full and fair evaluation, we must provide relief measures that make this transition as manageable as possible, especially for our most vulnerable citizens. As I stated at the news conference several weeks ago, this package of bills, including the already enacted SB 1301, which provided the city with authority to provide a homestead exemption, gives us the tools we need to make this transition as fairly and as equitable as possible. And I respect the fact that the individuals testifying before me said that to an individual, whatever that tax assessment said, it may not be fair. So I want to say as fair and as equitable as possible. These bills will do the following. Additional authority to collect delinquent property taxes. Under this bill, our improved ability to collect property taxes would have a positive effect on our millage rate by increasing our collection factor. The facts that I am about to share with you to speak to the potential of this bill. Currently, the total number of tax delinquent parcels where two or more are owned by the same person is approximately 39,939. They are owned by 10,588 persons or entities, collectively 160 million in taxes. Now, I understand as legislators, it is very difficult when you talk about anything that authorizes or requires that you enact additional legislation relating to taxes. But at the end of the day, we have to have a reasonable answer to those individuals who respond to us by saying, what about all those people that owe taxes on anything? Having the ability to do this, I can tell you, Councilman Squill and I and the members of council had numbers of individuals coming down to testify about that challenge. So having that in place would be very helpful to us. As earlier stated, relief for long-term homeowners, and I've had significant conversations with a number of members in the Philadelphia delegation about some of the areas, and I know Rep. O'Brien, we actually represent similar interests over in the Northern Liberties areas. There's significant concerns. Representative Brownlee and I representing Fairmount, this is a challenge. What we seek to protect long-term owner-occupants who are already struggling financially to keep their homes and neighborhoods where property values have increased rapidly in a short period of time. This legislation grants to Philadelphia what has already been granted to Allegheny County, as referenced earlier, the ability to consider income, age, or a combination thereof when targeting relief for long-term homeowners. And as referenced earlier, this gives us more of an ability to target where it is most needed, and in addition to which we learned during the course of the conversation in last year's budget process that it is not as costly as homestead. So we think having this targeted approach will be very helpful to us. Third, the property tax installment payments. Most homeowners who have had mortgages are paying their property taxes in monthly installment payments into an escrow account. However, the city of Philadelphia has a lot of long-term homeowners, and those without mortgages, which according to a Pew study represents 40% of Philadelphia homeowners, are faced with paying their property taxes in a single lump sum payment with some narrow exceptions. Many of these homeowners find it impossible to make the payment and slowly but surely slip into delinquency, accruing interest and penalties on a monthly basis. This measure authorized the city to provide relief for those homeowners who are facing these very tragic circumstances. Last, and I think during the debate, if we are successful, I think this particular piece of legislation will probably be the most significant of them all, and not just on a county basis as it relates to the city of Philadelphia, but I think during the course of the conversation, I think that this provision could probably be extremely helpful as we deal with the state of Pennsylvania in making us a more competitive state. And that is the constitutional amendment authorizing 2 classes of property. As a result of reassessing all properties in Philadelphia, it is estimated that the commercial, hotel, and apartment sector will see a reduction in property taxes of approximately $111 million. $100 million will be shifted to residential properties and $11 million to stores and dwelling units. We could have offset this shift when we had the authority to tax property at a different rate than residential property as done in many municipalities throughout the country. In Pennsylvania, however, the courts have interpreted the uniformity clause in our state constitution to mean that there is only one class of real property. Similar clauses appear in some form in the constitutions of all 3 states. Yet in many of these states, these clauses have been interpreted to permit what is being proposed under this constitutional amendment. We realize this will not have an immediate impact, but it is necessary for the long-term fairness of our real estate tax system in Philadelphia. Now let me follow up a little bit on this testimony. Right now, in the city of Philadelphia, over the past several months, a series of meetings with our business leaders and some of the business property owners, and there are actually going to be some proposals made in a formal way. Interestingly enough, when we found this somewhat odd, during the course of the debate on AVI, we actually had real estate property owners coming into our office saying, you know what, we would like to have an increase in our real estate tax. And as I picked myself up off the floor, because that was pretty bizarre, I realized that their ability to have increases in real estate taxes, therefore freeing up potential revenue opportunities, thereby allowing us to reduce business privilege taxes and making us a more competitive city, was important to them. But we explained to them, because of the uniformity clause in the state of Pennsylvania, we don't have that flexibility. We have actually gotten a commitment, and I know Councilman Squilla, representing myself, we represent pretty much all of Center City. They have actually indicated they are prepared to testify wherever asked in support of this particular legislation. So we're prepared to have all these individuals come in and meet and be available to talk to you about the need to have some flexibility in this particular provision. So I just want to thank you so much for the long-term relationship. And as Chairwoman Parker said, our ability to get together early on in the Constitution, at the Convention Center, was very important, and it allowed us to sustain this working relationship, because at the end of the day, it's all about the people. It's not about parties. It's not about particular branches of government. It's about the individuals, and I think it's important to have established that relationship. Councilman, my good friend.
I wasn't prepared to speak, but Councilman Mark Squilla, the 1st District here in City of Philadelphia. I want to reiterate what Council President Clarke has said, and really our gratitude to the state legislature for working with us and really helping us to make this, and this is not an easy task for us in City Council, and for you to be able to introduce this package of bills will actually give us reason and hope that enable us to do this. And especially as Councilman Clarke said about the uniformity clause, when you talk to the Chamber of Commerce and they're saying, we're okay with the real estate tax, we would love to be able to reduce the business taxes or maybe the wage tax and to help us offset and encourage business, we could see that option's there, and we have all avenues, everybody working in the same direction. It just makes a lot more sense to go this way, and we can't do it without you and without state enabling legislation. And to have council, the administration, and the state working toward that direction, it's probably unheard of. People are shaking their heads. Everybody's agreeing on this? Are you sure? But we are sure, and we really do appreciate your help, and anything we could do to help lobby that or make people realize how important that is to us, we're here to do that for you. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Squilla and Council President Clarke. 2 more members have joined us, Rep. Mark Cohen from the 201st District. 202nd District here in Philadelphia, and Rep. Jared Gibbons is here. So thank you both for being here. Council President Clarke, you mentioned a key word for us. One was bipartisanship. And although this is formally and officially the Democratic Policy Committee hearing, we need to note for the record and for all of those who are here in the audience that the package that was passed, the 2 bills last year, would not have been passed without the support of 2 Republican members who represent the city of Philadelphia but are not here today. But they are crucial to any and everything that we need done in Harrisburg, because we need to have support from both sides of the aisle, and that's Representative Miller and Representative Thomas. And it's important that we recognize that, because if we, sort of move forward with this legislation in the spirit of we're doing it in a partisan way, it's dead before we even get started. So Representative Taylor and Mert need to know that we need them moving forward in this process, and we know nothing will move without them. The first question, Council President, and this is just generally, and Councilman Squilla, if you want to comment on this, help me here. Sometimes we get asked, particularly when we were drafting these bills, why are they not more specific in nature? Explain to us why council needs to have the flexibility to any kind of initiative that you attempt to put forth, and why you don't need the General Assembly acting as members of council. You sort of need us to enable you to do it, and then you do it. But people ask me all of the time, we should tailor it and tighten it, and we said, no, let's just let council do it. Explain to us, both of you, if you will, why this is necessary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a very good question, and I know it was asked of you numerous times because it was asked of me. The reality is that you all, members of the policy committee, the Democratic House delegation, and the Republicans who are not here will be dealing with a very challenging situation in Harrisburg. You will be dealing with a challenging budget. You will be dealing with significant challenges as it relates to legislation in Harrisburg, similar to what we've been dealing with. So in all honesty, to put the burden on you to come up with detailed legislation for things that we have to enact in the city of Philadelphia, fundamentally is just not fair, because we have to deal with it in real time. During the course of last year's budget debate, the councilman can tell you, we changed our mind every 2 days. That's why it was reported in the newspaper. One day the rate was 1.2, the next day it was 1.4, next day it was 1.8. And all that had to do with the inability for us to have the flexibility to enact legislation, because we were dealing with homestead and essentially nothing else. Gentrification that did not have any flexibility. So not having the tools and the ability to move those tools in the appropriate time to ultimately get to a budget conclusion to do that. You giving us the authority on a local level to enact and implement legislation that would provide support for those individuals who truly have challenges relating to their taxes is very important to us. I feel even more comfortable that it will be done in a way that makes some sense because of our relationship. If we didn't have the type of relationship that we formed over the last year with the General Assembly, the Philly delegation, I would have some reservations from your side. But the reality is, when we do anything, we talk to you all. Our staffs interact on a consistent basis. I was asked to come to the press conference, and we drove up to Harrisburg in a heartbeat, did the press conference and came back because we understand the importance of us having that relationship throughout this entire process. So giving us the ability to do this, I think is important for us to have that flexibility. And one thing that we have established in our partnership, that before we enact anything, we always check in with you. And as far as these council members are concerned, as we move forward, that process will continue to stay in place. So having that flexibility in terms of enabling legislation really benefits in terms of being able to get throughout our budget process in a relatively reasonable way.
My final question, and then we'll hear from Rep. Harris, is you all do it every day. Councilman Squilla, Councilman Clarke, you do it every day. Just very simply for us, if you will, explain the process about how tax rates are set, about the mayor, the administration coming up with the number, council. Just explain it for the record for us.
Okay. Councilman, you want that? Expert.
This is, well, AVI-wise, obviously the way it's going to be set, the way it's done now, is a lot different than the way it's going to be in the future if AVI is legislated this term. The way AVI will be set now will be the administration through OPA, Office of Property Assessment, is going out and reassess every property in the city of Philadelphia, come up with a value, times it by a millage rate that we're going to hopefully come up with a number, take that into consideration with any homesteads or safeguards that we put in place. And the tax rate will be simple. It'll be based on if your house is worth $100,000 and your millage rate is ended up, then you would pay $1,000 on your real estate taxes. Everybody would know that all the way through. But the reason why we wanted the flexibility that you gave us with this legislation is that we sort of don't have all the numbers completed. And we're not really sure how the determinate budgeted amount that we need is going to affect the millage rate that we have. If we would have passed it last year, we would have had to do it on a formulaic method where we would have knew how much money we needed, and then whatever the total assessment would have came in, we would have had to divide that together in order to get a millage rate. We happened to delay that through council because we didn't think that was the right way to go about doing it. And so this year, with hopefully this enabling legislation, gives us more options and opportunities to make this as simple as possible by getting just the total average assessed value of your home, and then we know how much money that the administration is going to be asking for. It's supposedly $1.2 will come from real estate, and then we'll get that number, average it down to what our millage rate would be, depending on whatever homesteads and put in place. Because whatever homesteads we put in there, if it's $30,000, it may raise the millage rate 0.1%. If we have a gentrification bill in there that it uses up to maybe $30 million, that may raise it a little more. So every protection that we put in place, we also are going to be raising our millage rate. So we got to be careful, balancing point, where no matter what you put in place, if you put a gentrification bill in and or a homestead, there's going to be at some point where the person, even though they're getting that, would pay more because of those added bonuses. So this is why we need the flexibility in order to figure all these out once we get the actual numbers from OPA, and then we could sort of play with the numbers and massage them enough so we know what can benefit the residents the most.
Thank you. Rep. Paris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for bringing us all together to talk about such an important issue for our folks in Philadelphia, and also to Chairman Darrell for having the policy committee. I thank all my other colleagues from across the Commonwealth for being here. Thank you, Council President and Councilman Squilla, for being here as well. I myself actually, and Representative Sims, represents a certain part of our district that is very much a gentrifying neighborhood, and I know some folks from the Civic Association that represents that area are here and will be testifying later. But my question is for you. I don't know if it should be for you or if it should be for the administration. But Pew talked about how $30,000 of a homestead would be different for a person living in a $100,000 home than a person living in a $300,000 home. Is there anything that council or the administration is looking at doing with regards to folks who are in neighborhoods where the home cost or the value of the home has changed, dramatically? There's certain parts of my district where a person bought their home for $30,000, $40,000, and they've been in that home since, and now those homes are realistically $300,000 and $400,000. So even with a $30,000 homestead exemption, the tax rate or the tax bill on that house is going to be well out of a person's price range. And what I don't want to see is what I've seen come into my district office is folks who they see the tax bill, they know they can't afford it, they don't deal with it, and then 3 or 4 years down the road, the tax bill is now $15,000, and the home is now up for sheriff's sale. So I don't know if this is an administration question or a council question, but what are we going to, what are we looking at doing with, the homes where the value has gone up significantly?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question, Representative, because both the councilman and myself, we represent similar areas. In some cases, I represent an area with Representative Sims in the 8th Ward in my district. We found that out during the course of the debate within council, that when we talked about a particular amount for homestead, whereas $30,000 may have been beneficial to an individual who lived in a property in a neighborhood where the values haven't changed that dramatically. Okay, pretty good, 30,000 credit, that's fine. But we looked at other areas where you reference where that person's property value is now $300,000. That person bought the home when it was $15,000 a long time ago, and through no fault of their own, as a result of us now analyzing property based on the actual market value, that property is now worth $300,000. And this individual basically has an income that can give them an opportunity to pay that $300,000 tax bill. So what we like to do, which is why it's important to have the gentrification flexibility, where you say a long-term property owner, a person that bought their property, I'm just throwing numbers out not to suggest that these will be the numbers, they bought their property 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, lived in a particular neighborhood, and through no fault of their own, their tax bill has now spiked because a lot of new housing starts have come into the neighborhood, and those properties' values have accelerated 3, 4, 5 times. That person shouldn't be responsible because they aren't in a position to have to pay that tax. So we'd like to enact some means-based legislation or legislation based on the term that an individual has lived in, particularly in those gentrified areas, to give that person some relief. So that bill in itself, I think, will give us significant opportunities to provide some relief to those individuals where that particular scenario has taken place. And the good thing is, increasingly, that's starting to happen because our city is. The downside of that is that it is impacting some people, or potentially impact some people in a very negative way. So I think it's our responsibility, if you give us the enabling legislation, to be in a position to do something about that.
Mayor Show, right?
Yes,
Okay. Let us also recognize the presence of Rep. Burns and Rep. Harhide. Thank you also very much for being here. And Council President, I also want to note for the record, the way a long-term owner-occupant is defined in state law, because we got calls from folk about this, like, what does long-term mean? How is that defined? We didn't have to come up and create a number or negotiate a number. State law dictates that long-term is defined as 10 years, just so that we all know for the record. Chairman Sterling.
Thank you. Well, even though we don't bite, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. A couple of questions. One, on the issue of, the person that bought their home for $30,000 20 years ago or whenever, and now it's worth $300,000 or $400,000. And as you pointed out, President Clarke, by no fault of their own, it's now worth $300,000. By no fault of their own, they stand to make $270,000 on it. At some point in time, if the city says, look, you don't owe those taxes on it now, do you go back and do, in essence, a reverse mortgage and say, but when you sell that place for $300,000, we get paid those taxes because it was worth $270,000 more by no fault of your own. You had a windfall, and you get taxed for that at some point in time. Not now. We're not going to kick you out of your house, but at some point. Is that part of the discussion, or?
With the councilman.
Yes. Thank you for that question, because it's something that we debated last session, even as far as the deferral of taxes, and how to put the deferral into a gentrified type bill. Was it going to be means tested, or we did have the ability to do gentrification, but it was across the board. We could never look at income levels. So what we can do with this bill would be able to defer the taxes for the residents, that when they do sell their homes, they would have to pay a certain amount of taxes back to the city of Philadelphia at that time. So they are options that we are looking into at this point. And, we as the city of Philadelphia know we have to have certain income levels that we have to reach, and we need to find any possible direction to get there. And going back and forth, whether to do a deferral tax base, or whether to do a cap on taxes that they would raise, or whether to do and abate it for a certain number of years. They were all things that we discussed, but we never got to that point because we had delayed AVI for the 1 year. But that is something that we have talked about and probably would like to, I'm not going to say what direction we're going to go, because I don't know how council, we get 9 people to agree on one thing is not easy all the time. But it's going to be tossed out there and part of the process on making AVI possible.
Okay. One other quick question, and again, to play devil's advocate, with the dual valuation of residential versus commercial. To date in this state, the only place I've seen a dual valuation, or a different tax rate, if you will, on commercial versus residential is in those areas where we've exempted businesses from property taxes. KOZs, KIZs, we want to attract businesses, so we say you don't have to pay taxes if you just locate your business there. And while I think it's laudable that the businesses are now saying, hey, we'll even pay higher taxes if you want to tax us at a higher rate than the residential. I guess my question is, at what point in time, and if we do it statewide, in which communities do they say, great, we can do it at a different level? Business doesn't pay any taxes, residents pay all the taxes.
Right.
I mean, how do we build protections in to make sure that it doesn't happen immediately in some areas and eventually in Philadelphia?
Right. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting, again, during the course of last year, and we actually learned a lot in that debate, although we didn't move towards AVI in the last fiscal year. The conversation centered around exemptions, current, and actually in the city of Philadelphia, we actually have a 10-year tax abatement program. When a person builds a new house, they get a 10-year tax abatement program. It's caused some consternation in some of our neighborhoods because the reality is in a lot of those neighborhoods that are gentrifying, those individuals have a 10-year tax abatement while the person down the street for us. That's the type of thing. And I got to tell you, there's actually a bill introduced by one of our colleagues to possibly revisit that 10-year tax abatement within the city of Philadelphia. With respect to the KOZs and the KOIZs, that's something that, again, would have to be done on a statewide level. It's something that cannot be enacted unless the local legislature is supportive of that particular measure. We have actually found in the last several years, there have not been a request for a significant number of KOIZs because the tax abatement has actually been more productive throughout the last several years and the availability of relief. So we may be looking at one in the near future, but I think the last KOIZ that we actually did was the Comcast building, which was quite some time ago. But the tax abatement, 10 years, 100%, I think is going to be a part of the conversation. Some question as to whether or not we need to continue to have that. Did we need it when it was enacted years ago, first 3 and then 5 and then 10? Absolutely. Philadelphia is quickly becoming a city of choice. So I don't know where that debate is going to go, but that is, in fact, going to be a part of the conversation.
I mean, I guess one of the things I'm hearing from you is that there needs to be enough flexibility built into this that you can adjust as the market changes, so that you don't get caught 10 or 20 or 30 years from now going, why would anybody have ever done that 30 years ago?
Correct. Correct.
And also, Chairman, about the business and the commercial and industrial saying that they want to be taxed more, they might say that this year, 5 years from now, they might not say that we're getting taxed too much. But I mean, there could be protections in the law put in there where, you know, the only time that this evaluation can be changed is during total reassessment periods or something like that, or then when taxes are raised, it would have to be raised evenly on both sides. There's ways that you could do that to protect both the business and the residential side. So I think it can be done if it, you know, done correctly, and you have enough people talking about it. You come up with a good way to do it where you think it's going to be fair. And I know we heard fair mentioned several times here today. It's fair to me, might not be fair to the council president or to you guys. So, but I think if we look at it and say, okay, only time that we could do 2 classes of real estate is to do the total reassessment of properties, and then in that case, if taxes do go up, they have to go up sustainably the same way, so forth or so on. So I think that may be something that we could look into.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rep. O'Brien.
First, let me welcome my councilman. Good to see you. The list of members who want to ask questions is growing longer and longer, so I have one fast question. Has council gotten real numbers yet?
No.
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 So at this late date, council is still being asked, as my mother used to say, to buy a cat in the bag. Yes?
I wouldn't necessarily characterize it that way, because I understand whatever I say will end up in print. But
no numbers.
We've been assured by the administration.
As you were in June, as you were in September,
the
as you were.
numbers are coming. They are, so they will be able to testify directly to.
But
the
you don't
topic.
have them. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
I have them now.
Thank you.
Rep. Roebuck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. To the council president and councilman, when I bought my house now 40 years ago, it had not been lived in for 5 years. And the previous owner, though she claimed that she loved it, she didn't do basic things like turn off the water when she left it. So I ended up with what was in reality a shell. But I found that I was paying exactly the same taxes as anyone else on my block. There was no differential for the condition of the house. Some of the properties were then as they are still now, properties that produce income. The tax rate stays the same. Now, my understanding that with AVI, we're going to go to a different system where each individual house is going to be judged individually, and there'll be recognition of differentials in condition, as well as what is done within that house? Because I've hit a brick wall when I'm raised that issue in terms of properties that should be certainly assessed less or more according to condition.
Yeah, actually, and I understand that particular situation because I think we all have them in our neighborhoods. One of the things that will happen if and when we enact AVI, and we will, is that our resource level as it relates to being able to have real-time assessments will be enhanced dramatically. A couple of years ago, the administration asked council to authorize additional revenue to hire in the Office of Property and Assessment significant workforce that would enable us to do, hopefully on an annual, reasonably close to an annual basis, all of the assessed properties throughout the neighborhood. More information is provided as it relates to the condition of the property. So hopefully, if this is enacted in the appropriate way, you will no longer, as a vacant shell, because you live on a block where all of the properties are worth $300,000, you will not be taxed at that level. There will be actual accounting of the condition of that property. You will actually be able to call and have an assessor come out and look at the individual property to determine the condition of that property, and it will be based on that particular condition how you will be assessing that individual property.
Thank you.
Chairman Barkosik.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and President Clarke, Mr. Councilman. Very briefly, in your testimony, property taxes in the city, and I wasn't sure I got all the numbers. I believe it was it 160 million?
That's for that particular category of property owners. The numbers, right now, there's a number out there that says around $500 million. I'd probably say, and the finance chair is here, he can probably give you more accurate accounting of it. It's probably close to, in terms of the actual taxes owed and being able to actually collect those taxes, probably close to $300 million. Whatever it is too high. And a part of the challenge as it relates to our ability to collect taxes, if I can kind of read where you're going with your next question, is that you have a situation, which is why we reference this particular category of property owners. This person, and we're going to show you documents throughout the course of this process, there's an individual property owner, I won't call that person's name today, who has a mansion in Jersey. We brought the pictures up, and with the new Google system, you can actually look at their property. Biggest swimming pool I've ever seen. Councilman, we could probably fit like 5 of our houses in that swimming pool alone, right? Well manicured, nice cut lawn, don't own any taxes on that property, right? But they owe multiple property taxes in the city on a number of properties, and 3 of the properties are tax delinquent, but the other ones aren't. And when you look at those properties, you say, okay, they're actually revenue-producing properties where they actually have tenants. So you know what? These properties that you owe, we're going to actually take that lien that we place on you for not paying the taxes on the 3, we're going to put it on all your properties. So now, all of a sudden, if that property works its way towards sheriff's sale, it's a little more important to you because I actually have a revenue-producing property that I have paying tenants that may go on sheriff's sale. This particular legislation gives us the authority to do that. That's why it's extremely important.
Okay.
At the end of the day, it's not fair to ask individuals to pay additional taxes if we're not collecting the taxes that are currently owed to us.
What is the City of Philadelphia overall budget, and roughly what is the percentage of uncollectible taxes? What would that amount, whatever it is, $500 million, what percentage of the overall city budget would that represent?
Realistically, because it would be essentially a one-shot deal, because a lot of these taxes are owed over a period of time, it's difficult to calculate on an annual basis. But say, for instance, if we're able to collect $250 million that for an annual basis, $4 billion for all intents and purposes, counting all of the things that we have to deal with. That's a significant chunk as it relates to that particular annual budget. And we do think that in terms of our collection process, it will be annualized because now people understand I have to start paying my taxes. So I like to say that we can easily collect an additional $100 million. And I'm throwing a number out there. Again, the finance chair can give you a more accurate accounting. $100 million extra in tax collection on an annual basis, I think, is very significant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Rep. Donatucci?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councilman President, Councilman Squilla. I have a lot of constituents now that it's coming out that they want to separate the residential with the commercial. And I have people, a lot of people in my district that have the corner stores. So they have the CMX, which are the mixed use commercial, and they're worried, are they going to get hit over the head like a person that owns an apartment building or an office building in the city, or will there be different graduated rates depending on what type of commercial property it is? And
Yes, those particular properties, in terms of the tax rate, should be based on the category of property. The One Liberty Place should not have the same categorization as the corner store where the people live upstairs or somebody else lives upstairs and they have the small mom and pop commercial property on the first floor. Having the flexibility as it relates to the implementation of rates will give us that opportunity, and I think we actually have that because it will be based on the current value of that property. Will give us more flexibility to enact not only just between residential and commercial, but within the category of commercial properties. And I think that's very important for us.
thank you. I can tell them not to panic then.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We actually want to encourage the discussion about so many properties in the city of Philadelphia that had the upper floors that are not utilized throughout the city. I know Councilman Squill and I, we represent Chestnut Street as an example, where as prosperous as Chestnut Street is in Center City, the reality is a significant number of the upper floors are vacant. Encourage individuals to move upstairs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Council President Clarke and Councilman Squilla, we want to thank you so much for your time. But on the record, we have Rep. Brownlee. I'm sorry, before we finish. Rep. Brownlee.
Pardon me, Madam Chair. Thank you, and thank you, Chairman Sterler. Mark, we got to stop meeting like this. And my council person. There's one question I was waiting to find if anybody would ask, so let me ask. With this set of bills, hopefully moving through the legislature, what is the time frame that enact the AVI as opposed to these bills to give you the tools to help mitigate what's going to happen with AVI? Can you give us a...
Yeah, actually, it is the intent at this point of City Council, and again, we are individually elected officials just like you are. At the end of the day, everybody has their vote. But based on the action that was taken last year, and you so graciously helped us on in delaying AVI, the target date for the implementation of AVI was this particular budget year. The budget that will be presented by the mayor will be based on, I'm assuming, this particular AVI implementation. Having the ability to have these bills enacted before we conclude our budget process, I think will enhance our ability to get this done in a reasonable way fivefold. I mean, it's just simply that's the case. The problem with last year, despite of the fact that we didn't have the numbers, we didn't feel comfortable, we didn't have enough tools to enact it in a reasonable way. So it's having this in place will be very, very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. And just want to say for the record, and I guess we need to do this for the record because we're going to be leaning on these folks a whole lot in the future. I need to say about Herb Wetzel, gentleman named House, last name slips me right now, Charday, young lady who works with us in the Philadelphia delegation, Tony Marchowski. Lewis is here, and Rob is here, and lots of times, we're the officials and the people do elect us, but the devil's always in the details and getting it done. So the drafts of the legislation and the phone calls, the late night work, they did a whole lot of it. And if it sounds like I want the staff to know that I thank them, I do, because I'm coming strong and hard the next go around, and we're really going to need them to work hard. So I just wanted to say thank you on the record. Thank you, Council President.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. As a former staff person of a councilman in the past, and you were a former staff person of a council person, and a number of you all who were former staff persons for elected officials, we understand who does the real work. So we get the credit, they do the real work. So but I, like you, want to continue good work.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next panel will be our Director of Finance for the City of Philadelphia, Rob Dubois. What's the portion? For being here, please identify yourselves for the record.
Good afternoon, Chairman Parker, Chairman Sterler, members of the Philadelphia House, and members of the Democratic Policy. I'm Rob Dubo, the Finance Director of the City of Philadelphia. With me is Anna Adams, the Finance Department's Chief of Staff. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today about the 4 pieces of legislation that we understand will be introduced to assist the city in its efforts to set policy in connection with implementing a fair and accurate reassessment system for the city. As we've discussed before, we're engaged in a process to fix what has widely been known to be an inaccurate, inequitable, and confusing property assessment system. From long before the start of the mayor's administration, the city's real estate tax assessments have been viewed as inaccurate and in need of reform. In too many instances, assessments have been based on old and inaccurate data concerning the features of properties. In addition, the BRT did not conduct full reassessment of all real property for many years, so valuations that once may have been accurate became outdated. What this has meant is that many property owners who have been highly underassessed have been paying they should had assessments been accurate relative to other property owners. Many other property owners whose assessments have more closely matched the real values of their properties have been paying more than they should relative to other property owners. In May 2010, Philadelphia voters approved a referendum to shift the role of making assessments from the Board of Revision of Taxes to the Office of Property Assessment. Since October 2010, the office has been directed by Chief Assessment Officer Richie McKeithen, who's worked extremely hard with his staff for more than 2 years to get our assessments right. We're now in position to issue new accurate assessments across the city on February 15th of this year. In conjunction with the new tax rate that will be set by City Council and the Mayor before the start of the next fiscal year, these new assessments will be the basis of tax bills sent out in December 13 and will be due in early 2014. In connection with the process for setting the tax rate, we agree that it's helpful flexibility as possible in making the important policy decisions that Council and the Mayor will make regarding the implementation effort. We very much appreciate the House delegation's willingness to support that effort with the legislation that's being discussed today. One significant issue in connection with property tax policy and the shift to an accurate assessment system is the relative taxation of residential properties and non-residential properties, like commercial and industrial properties. As the Council President discussed, it's fairly clear there'll be some overall shift of property tax burden from non-residential to residential properties as a result of this process. And as has also been discussed, under the Constitution's Uniformity Clause, as the provision has been interpreted by the courts, taxing jurisdictions are not permitted to tax classes of properties with different rates. This is very different from the rules that apply in many states and local jurisdictions where commercial properties are often taxed at higher rates than residential properties. We understand the proposed constitutional amendment will be introduced and it would allow the city to impose differing rates of real estate tax on commercial as opposed to residential properties. Flexibility to set different rates for different classes of properties would be a welcome policy-making tool. We're not naive about the difficulties in getting a constitutional amendment on the ballot, but we appreciate the delegation's effort to start that process. Another important issue in this process is what kind of relief might be provided to long-term owner-occupants of residential properties who are living in neighborhoods that have seen large increases in home values. And we've talked about this before today too, but for various reasons, assessments have not kept up with those changes because of our broken system. Those homeowners may see their tax bills, some of which currently may be quite low, increase significantly as a result of the process. Currently, the city is allowed to provide relief from increases in bills to owner-occupants of residential properties who have been in their properties for 10 years or more. We do not, however, have the authority to limit the relief based on the age or income level of the property owner. It's our understanding legislation will be introduced that provides that if the city adopts gentrification relief, it must take into account financial need, age, or both. We support having additional authority to refine how gentrification type of relief may be provided in order to establish our policies in a more nuanced way. In this regard, we're not sure that 10-year residency is the appropriate starting point for this relief, because in some neighborhoods that have been changed significantly in the last 15 or even 20 years, people who've moved in the last 11 or 12 years may actually have been part of the gentrification process. So we recommend that this legislation allow to establish a minimum time of residence to qualify, as long as the period is at least 10 years. We also understand that a bill will be introduced to authorize the city to provide for installment payments of real estate taxes. As we've discussed with council, there are significant issues that would need to be resolved regarding cash flow problems if we were not collecting the majority of our real estate receipts when they are currently received, not only for the city, but for the school district, which of course receives more than half of Philadelphia's property tax revenue. We understand this bill creates an authorization for collection of installment payments, not a mandate, and we are supportive of that authorization. In our discussion with the public about reassessment processes, we often hear about our tax collection efforts. And it's understandable that as people hear about the possibility of changes in their tax bills, they would expect us to also be focused on collecting taxes from those who are behind on their bills. In general, we've been in the process of making improvements to our tax collection efforts in a variety of ways, from sending tax-delinquent taxpayers notices earlier and increasing the number of share sales. We understand a bill will be introduced that would allow us to transfer real estate tax liability to properties in other jurisdictions without having to take the additional step of seeking an in-person judgment against the taxpayer in Philadelphia before making the transfer. That would make it easier for us to go after properties of Philadelphia tax delinquents that are located in other jurisdictions, and we welcome that additional authority. We greatly appreciate the efforts of the Philadelphia House delegation to assist us. What we recognize is a difficult transition for many taxpayers as we move to a system of fair, accurate, and more understandable assessments. That concludes my testimony, and we'd be very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Rob. And I want to note for the benefit of the public and the press who are here, I've been in contact with Mayor Nutter on more occasions. He has emphatically and strongly communicated his support for this package of bills, and I do want to thank the mayor for the record, and you all make sure, because you know messages get confused in politics, so you make sure you let the mayor know that we thank him for his support.
We will do that.
Now, Rob, with that in mind, the first question, we heard a little bit about it earlier. You know, you all gave us a briefing, the Philadelphia delegation, and, you know, you sort of released to us some of the numbers that you already had. Told us that you were still in the process of collecting them. For the record, answer the question about the numbers. Why aren't they finished now? What happened, so that that question is answered for the record?
Right. So there are two things. There's kind of we originally, as you know, were looking to do the move to the new assessments in 2013. For a variety of reasons, that was pushed back to 2014. Which meant that for 2013, we had to update our old assessments. When we went to update our old assessments, we put on hold the reassessment until that process was done. Then we started that up again. We have gotten to the point where we have total numbers, and that's what we briefed you on and released publicly. It's almost $100 billion, and we talked about, you know, what rate that would mean, and we talked about the shift from commercial to residential. What we don't have yet, and what we hope to have really probably within a week, is neighborhood by neighborhood. Should also say that if it's a week from now, that will be well in advance of when we're asking for any action from City Council. We won't be submitting our budget, which will include a rate, until early March. And then we anticipate that, as usual, the council hearing process will go at least until the end of May. So that information, that detailed information, will be available well before any council action is taken. And actually, the assessments will be mailed out in mid-February, so people will know what their individual assessments are in mid-February.
Okay, we've heard this from Pew and others that I've communicated with in Harrisburg and some national experts about this issue of ongoing and or regular assessments. Although we have no state law governing how, when, sort of, telling the counties and municipalities how this needs to be done, does the administration sort of have a plan once OPA gets through this process? Council has the numbers and you've assessed every property in the city. The sticker shock that Pew referenced earlier, what are we going to do without a law? We're talking about sort of within our own purview. What can we do to ensure that this kind of sticker shock doesn't reach Philadelphians 5 years from now after we've done all this work?
Right. We completely agree that it's important to maintain the assessment system, that we shouldn't have another gap between when an accurate assessment is done and a new reassessment is done. Our Office of Property Assessment plans to do reassessments every year, so they'll be kept up to date, so you wouldn't have sticker shock again.
So every year
Yes.
to keep them up. So regionally, you'll probably do a section, or you're talking about the entire city on an annual basis?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, obviously, it's not the same kind done this year, but their plan is to keep it up to date.
And sorry, it also doesn't mean that everybody will get a new reassessment every year. It just means that as the market changes in certain areas, some people will get reassessments. It doesn't mean that everybody will get a new assessment notice every year.
Okay. Representative O'Brien.
So you came to see me in June, and you told me you'd have real numbers in 2 weeks. It was 6 months ago. Now, you say you're going to have them next week. June, 6 months later, now, next week. Not that I've ever really been nice to you, Rob, but I can't be nice today. I gotta ask, what do we have here? Do we have gross incompetence, or do we have the administration trying to stonewall and withhold information to put us at a budget crisis? What are we doing?
I'm going to go with option C.
What is that?
As I said
What's option C?
Well, I'm going to explain it to you, if you give me a chance. As I said to Chairman Parker, when AVI was put off for a year, we had to go back and do assessments on the old system. That meant stopping the AVI process. So that is the reason that we didn't get it done on the time frame that we would have gotten it done if we had done AVI in 2013. There's not going to be a crisis. We won't even be submitting a budget for 2 months from now. The information about the total assessments we've already briefed you on it. The neighborhood by neighborhood information will be released well when anybody has to take any action. In fact, everyone will be getting their assessments in mid-February. Again, well before we submit our budget, well before we take any action at the local level.
So, if you're 2 weeks away, what will be the average property tax increase in Queen Village?
As I said, we don't have the neighborhood by neighborhood information.
If you're 2 weeks away, what will be the property tax increase in Northern Liberties? If you're 2 weeks away, what will be the average property tax increase in Fishtown?
Well,
you're stonewalling or you're incompetent. Which is it?
It's neither.
I have no further questions.
And the other answer to your question is it will depend on what we do with things like gentrification relief, where we wind up on the homestead exemption. There are a lot of policy questions for us to work out with council over the next 3 to 4 months before we have final answers to those questions.
Representative Sterler.
Thank you. I see in the report from the Pew Trust that on page 15 they talk about exemptions, abatements, and delinquencies, and it says 30% of the total value of all properties in the city are tax-exempt parcels. And I know I represent the city of Lancaster in Lancaster County, and I think ours is above 25% also. And it also says that back in 1990, there was $9 million collected in pilots or payments in lieu of taxes. And we had a voluntary program where we had payments in lieu of taxes. And Act 55 came along a few years ago and said we couldn't even ask for payments in lieu of taxes. And but if 30% of the value is in tax-exempt properties, if they were tax-paying properties, what would that amount to in terms of dollars per year?
Well, the 30% may change when we go to actual value because that's off the old numbers. The numbers we were talking about, let's probably look at a little less than that because we're about almost 100 million of taxable and probably 30 million of exempt. But still, as you can see, it's still going to be, and maybe that's about a quarter. And if we generate $1.2 billion, a quarter of that's going to be like $300 million. So it's a significant.
About $300 million.
But that's just it's an estimate. We wouldn't know until.
Right, and I get that. But I just, I guess what I'm looking at is, and I have legislation I'll be introducing that deals with sort of a statewide payment in lieu of taxes. It's my understanding that I think it's Connecticut does a state distribution of taxes to municipalities that have high percentages of tax-exempt properties. And we already do that in the more rural parts of this state. Municipalities that have state forest land, we actually pay them a payment in lieu of taxes, apparently because they can't generate income off of those properties. I think that same applies in some cases, particularly in cities. Homeless shelters, not only can't you generate a income off of it, you actually spend a lot of money in city services on those kinds of properties. So I think it would be worthwhile for us to look at that. And even if I could only get you 10 cents on the dollar, if we'd be looking at $30 million, it's nothing to sneeze at. So I guess the question I have, though, with the AVI, do you actually look at the value of those? One of the concerns that I've been told by people is, well, look, we just say that they're tax exempt, and so we don't really know how much they're worth anyway. But you will be doing that with this.
Yeah,
okay.
We look at every property. We're also planning to start a process of auditing tax exempt properties to make sure that they really have tax exempt functions.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Sterler. That's great. We needed that on the record. Thank you, because individual council members have just taken some action or called for some hearings on the issue that you just raised. So I'm happy to hear about that movement. So Rob, I know we'll be watching Chairman Sterler's co-sponsorship memos to see when he gets that legislation.
We're looking forward to that.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Finance Director, for being here. I'm going to ask you, two questions. The first question I'm going to ask is the same question that I posed to Council President Clarke. But from your perspective, what is the administration's position, or what is the administration looking to do at gentrifying neighborhoods where the $30,000 homestead really wouldn't put a dent in that person's property value because it's skyrocketed so much, and that's a major concern for myself because of some of the areas in my district where, again, I'll say it again, we're not even talking about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times the value of what it is being assessed at currently. That's the first question. My second question is, what is the administration doing as far as the law department to gear up for going after the number of delinquent properties that will now be able to go after if the legislation is actually passed? Thank you.
Okay. And we understand the potential negative impacts of gentrification and the need to look at ways to address that. It's one of the reasons that we're grateful for this legislation. We've had conversations with council really dating back to last spring about how to handle that. and we plan to talk with them during this spring's process, too, to come up with legislation to protect people in gentrifying areas. Did that answer the first question?
I mean, I guess my question is, does the administration have an idea, perspective now on how to handle that, understanding that, my house was $50,000, now it's $400,000, $30,000 is really not going to do anything for me.
Right. And in terms of the gentrification relief we've talked about has either been some kind of deferral or some kind of cap, and I think that's where we'd wind up, one of those two places.
Okay.
In terms of the law department and the revenue department, in terms of going after people and being able to lien, we've had a number of discussions about increasing their ability, increasing the resources that they have to go after them. So that's something we'll definitely be doing and looking to do in our upcoming budget in a way that should help them go after these delinquents and other delinquents too.
If I can follow up, I did express to Chairwoman Parker a few weeks ago that I do have one concern, and this is not, I'm trying to say how I phrase it. I'm concerned about the grandmother or the mother in my district who lives in a certain area who recently now has a second property that, because of the death of a child, if it's a mother, if you're a mom, the death of your parent, you now have this second property that you didn't anticipate having. That property was already delinquent on taxes, but it's a family property. We're not talking about the person that has 5, 6, 7 properties. We're talking about the person who's now not only responsible for their property, but responsible for the property that owns. And the reason why I say that is because my mother and my grandmother live on the same block. They've lived on the same block since I was born. So if you live, and I put it out there, if you live on Christian Street in my district, and your mother dies, and you now are responsible for her house on Christian Street, you're now going to be responsible for the $400,000 home that your house is going to be valued at, although they wasn't valued at that when you bought the house. And now you'll also be responsible for your parents' home. Now, the easy answer will be, oh, well, just sell the property. Well, I mean, that's easier said than done in certain markets. So what are we doing as far as not necessarily relief for that person, but relief in the tax delinquency of how we're helping that person get to a place where they're no longer delinquent without going after their property as quickly as we're trying to person who owns 6 and 7 properties and who has a history of being delinquent.
And what we would probably do, and our best outlet for them is probably our payment plans, so that they could pay that off over a period of time. I think that's probably the best option in that case.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Rep. Donatucci?
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Are any of the new assessments on the OPA site?
No, they are not there yet.
Okay, so if somebody saw a different assessment there, do we know what's going on?
If it's a different assessment, it was probably something that was changed during last year's process. There were when we went back to having to use the old assessment system, there were about 5,000 properties roughly that had changes in their assessments, for a number of reasons. So they were probably one of those properties.
But would it jump dramatically? I had somebody come to me and ask me, and they saw a jump from like a $37,000 assessment to a $170,000 assessment. Is that possible?
I mean, if they had an abatement expiring, it could be. And maybe we should.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for your testimony. Any more questions from my colleagues? Thank you so much. And Rob, please let the mayor know that we appreciate his support.
Thank you.
And Lewis will be bothering you soon, wherever you are. I saw you in here somewhere.
And thank you for all your support.
Okay. Our next panel and final panel will consist of our residents associations, Jeffrey Braff Andrew Dalzell, and Paul Toner. If I did not pronounce your name correctly, I apologize. Okay, all right. Just have a seat, gentlemen, and thank you so much for coming and agreeing to participate. As you all get started, I'll just ask you to state your name for the record and the organization that you represent.
Good afternoon. Jeffrey Braff with the Center City Residents Association. I'm the president. Chairwoman Parker, Chairman Sterla, and committee. Center City Residents Association represents residents and businesses in Center City between Broad Street and Schuylkill River, between South Street and JFK Boulevard. Brian Sims is our representative. We are delighted that we have so many representatives that are outside of Philadelphia that have taken an interest in this and are showing up today. Probably more delighted that this is being recorded, and we hope that people who are not here today and members of the Senate will get a chance to review this testimony because it's a very important issue. We are, and in fact, we come at it, we understand that there have been issues over the past years and even presently between Philadelphia and Harrisburg. Philadelphia is sometimes seen as a whipping post, and I'm sure it makes things difficult for the Philadelphia delegation. But this legislation that's been proposed from our perspective shouldn't present problems for people outside of Philadelphia. Doesn't require an expenditure of funds by the Commonwealth, doesn't require tax increases by the Commonwealth that the Commonwealth is imposing on citizens. And for legislators that are concerned about decentralization and local autonomy, this is it. This gives tools to City Council to choose to use or choose not to use. You heard Council President Clarke, Councilman Squilla, and we as a civic organization will have an opportunity to express our views in council as to the specifics of what gets presented. But we're asking the Commonwealth, we're asking the legislators to give the tools so that they can be debated on the local level where we get affected. To me, it's really a no-brainer. You heard testimony about we've got 4 types of legislation. I'm not going to go through that. Time is late, and you've heard it. But I will tell you that the tax issue is a major concern in our community. We've talked about it. We've testified before to council. They know our concerns, and we've got 2 proposals here that address it. Both the installment plan, I think if we allow taxes to be paid on an installment basis, it ought to reduce the amount of delinquency that we're seeing. And in terms of the tax liens, go after the bad guys. Again, can't hurt the Commonwealth. As to the uniformity clause in the state constitution, again, the way the legislation is written, it's limited to cities of the first class. Give us the opportunity. Let us weigh what we want to do. Let Philadelphia make this for itself. With respect to the relief for the long-term owner-occupants, what's also been referred to as gentrification, we do have one quibble. We don't understand why age should be a consideration. We understand the long-term nature. We understand financial needs. But if I'm a wealthy, 70-year-old who bought a property and it's increased in value, I don't understand why there should be relief for that. We understand the legislation is written, says age and/or financial needs, but we really have an issue there. The last thing I want to say is the Pew folks spoke first, and one of the things that they talked about is the importance of education, educating the community. And I want you to know that the Center City Residents Association, and I know Sosna has done this as well, we have held programs of our members. We held one in May. We've got another one scheduled next Wednesday. We'll have another one in May of 2013. These are very important issues for our constituents who vote. So please do whatever you can to get these bills, this package through. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee. Thank you, first of all, very much for the opportunity to come here today and speak to you. I know on behalf of the 12,000 residents in Southwest Center City, along with all the business owners, we certainly appreciate a chance to have our voice heard here today, along with their very able representation of our elected representatives. My name is Paul Toner. I'm chairman of SOSNA, and with me is our program coordinator. What's going on in Southwest Center City over the past 10 years has been nothing less than a neighborhood renaissance and an economic miracle. Mr. Dalzell is going to speak to you today about really the amazing changes that have come about in our neighborhood for a whole variety of reasons. But what I this afternoon, through the comments we've heard at recent presentations and discussions with our neighbors, is some of the fears our neighbors have about how the economic miracle, the neighborhood rejuvenation could come to a screeching halt with some of the proposals with AVI. So we're not here to speak on behalf of everyone in one unified voice. There are many voices in our neighborhood, but what we want to do today is share with you some of the most pressing needs and concerns of our neighbors. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our program coordinator, Mr. Andrew Dalzell.
Reiterated all the many thanks for taking the time to invite us here and to share the concerns of our neighbors who came out in the bitter cold last Wednesday to always fun AVI discussion and share their fears with us. And I think fear is a big word. Another big word is another F word that we've talked about is fair. I know that's a subjective term, but I think it's one that we should be all considering. Our neighborhood is a really unique one. Again, my name is Andrew Dalzell, the programs coordinator for the South of South Neighborhood Association. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization for the neighborhood bounded by South Street, Washington Avenue, Broad Street, and the Schuylkill River. We've been around for 25 years. We do a lot of affordable housing, and now we're funded to stimulate community and economic development. And I think we're truly blessed to represent one of the most special communities in the city of Philadelphia. It's a dense row house community with a rich history. Most recently, for decades and decades, it was one of the centers of the African American community. It's now changed dramatically, both in terms of population, in terms of the built environment, in terms of the socioeconomics. We've seen. Right now, we have old neighbors who've lived in their houses for multiple generations living in the same house. We have families who are living and struggling. They're living at or below the poverty line. We've got renters who are here for a couple years. We have many middle-class families that have just chosen to make Southwest Center City their home. We do have the upper middle class as well. But in the past 10 to 15 years, I mean, we really have, as Representative Harris noted, we've been the post-gentrification, the G word. For the last 90 years, we've suffered population loss to the point where our population is now 20,000 lower than what it used to be in 1900. But just in the past 10 years, for the first time as the city has as a whole, we've seen our population go up, and that's exciting. It's taken, the benefits have been ripple effects to impacts on our schools, is opening up, creating jobs, helping the tax base, safety as well, more eyes on the street, crime is going down. But part of that, the housing stock within the neighborhood really has transformed. I mean, people like to say in the community that if you didn't leave the neighborhood in the past 10 years, you'd hardly know that there was a recession because every single block has construction going on it. And a recent Fell study highlighted this. They went to 553 vacant homes in 1998 and took a look and surveyed all those 553 homes, came back in 2008 and found that only 49 of those homes were still vacant. 307 of those 553 were were renovated and occupied, 157 of those by owners. And 86% of that 157 homes of those residents are under the age of 46. And 50% between the ages of 25 and 35. These are not only people who have chosen to make this neighborhood their home for multiple generations, it's people who have chosen to make this neighborhood their first home, their place where they want to establish their roots, and I think that's pretty fantastic. They love living close to Center City. They love going to support the local businesses, and they have a vested interest in the strength of this community over the long haul. And what they told us last Wednesday was they are scared. There is uncertainty leads to fear, and that's what Paul is going to touch upon, some of the fears that were expressed at our January 23rd meeting.
First and foremost, we have many residents who have been with us for decades, for generations, who have not seen a reassessment of their homes and do stand to be significantly harmed by a drastic 3, 4, 5, 800% increase. Individuals in no way can be forgotten. And I believe this package of bills certainly does take appropriate measures to help protect them. There's a whole spectrum of individuals in our neighborhood, and we feel as though those who have come into the neighborhood over the past 10 years have invested in a community. Their voice needs to be remembered too. These are people who were given the opportunity of a 10-year tax abatement, who emptied their life savings to buy a home at what was the fair market value. And now that investment, not only in their home but in their community in the greater Philadelphia, needs to be protected. Some of the major concerns, and I'll go through these very quick, I know time is short. The elephant in the room at the meeting, and was something that was brought to light right away, were the consequences of all the tax exemptions and other smoothing measures. For every tick up in the millage, from 1.2 to 3 to 1.8, we're talking about hundreds of dollars in a middle-class taxpayer's monthly mortgage payment. So someone who lived in a $300,000 home, who now is paying somewhere between $8,000 and $1,000 in their yearly tax, if it's 1.2%, it goes up to $3,600. And let me just say, our neighbors almost universally said, we're willing to accept and we want to accept a greater tax burden. But you need to be realistic. At some point, the tax increase will become so significant that our neighbors are thinking about an exodus from our neighborhood. And when it gets to 1.8% on a $300,000 house, you're talking about $5,400. An extra $500, more or less, in someone's mortgage payment. For a school teacher, for an administrator, for someone who bought their first house, who is raising their family in our neighborhood, it's going to kill them, and they won't be able to stay. And of the packed Shiloh Baptist Church, wall to wall, that was the universal comment we heard, is that if it gets to a point, we just can't make ends meet. Certainly heard some discussion of this today, but I think it needs to be highlighted. There are many protections being proposed for those most vulnerable in our community, and they need to be there. But the reverse is we need to be careful not to scapegoat those who have a higher income, but have also made a huge investment in an area that was previously economic depressed and stand to lose their home. Like in the same way, someone who has a lower means will stand to lose their home. An 800% tax increase is an 800% tax increase. The number's just a little higher if you make a little more or if your house is worth a little more. So I think those individuals need to be remembered. There are a lot of unintended consequences. The yearly assessments, the fact that they're just going to be based on drive-bys before the initial review. There were a lot of concerns expressed that, will this really encourage people not to invest in the exterior of their home as opposed to... And don't we want people in neighborhoods to be making their homes look as great as possible? So in terms of the frequency of the assessments and taking a look at the total picture of a home's value, we certainly need to put more thought into just looking at the exterior in these first drive-bys. The massive tax delinquencies, it's evident. It doesn't need to be repeated. Everyone in the neighborhood wants to see those taxes collected. And again, to sum up my summary of the fears expressed at our recent public meeting, and as we've heard through the past several months, fairness. People are willing to pay more, but it needs to be done in a manner that doesn't rob people of what they bought into in terms of home ownership. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to add real quick on these 4 bills. Again, I really want to first call out Representative Harris for taking the time to come to our meeting last Wednesday and go through these 4 bills, and there was a lot of support for them expressed at that meeting, and I think they will go a long way to help make this fair, as Paul talked about. I'm not going to really touch on the constitutional change because we honestly didn't hear that much testimony from at our meeting from the business community, but we understand that if it's part of a larger package that reduces the burden on our local businesses, I think that's a good thing. The tax delinquency bill, I mean, people were about to shout to interrupt the meeting about tax delinquency, and they just, why are responsible taxpayers going to pay more when scofflaws get away with it? We've talked about it ad nauseum. The gentrification, big one. Our office gives out the forms for the senior citizen low-income tax freeze. That burden, that qualification level is 65 years old and over, and $23,500 in income. My question is, what happens if you make $25,000 or $26,000, just above the cutoff line? And that's why I think this bill is important. Or what if you're 60 and not 64 and not 65? Are you completely out of luck? On the other side is gentrification is 2 sides. There's the gentrified, which I think this bill will really help, but there's also the gentrifiers, who for no fault of their own decided to invest in this community, and they came to us feeling like they were being punished for taking a chance on a great neighborhood. And again, so much of it is about feelings, and they really felt put upon. I think the installments will certainly help a lot. I mean, there were people shouting out at the meeting saying, hey, that's just window dressing, hey, that's just lipstick on a pig. Our taxes are still going up 500%. But I think that it'll certainly help a long way. And if these bills can enable City Council to address a real comprehensive manner, acknowledging that it was not the taxpayer who kicked this can down the road. Mr. Toner didn't, Mr. Braff didn't, I did not kick this can down the road. The people who we put our faith in to do this on a regular basis are really asking folks to look under the mattress and find $4,500 more. That's a lot to ask. It's one thing if it's Hurricane Sandy, who does a lot of damage to your house, and you have to find that money. It's another thing for your own politicians to ask you to find that money for no fault of your own. And that's the feeling in the room. And so we really appreciate you giving us the time to express the concerns of that meeting. And again, to Mr. Harris for coming out to help explicate these bills to the public, because they really benefited from them.
So Jeff, Andrew, and Paul, we want to thank you so very much for agreeing to participate. Our first question is going to come from Rep. O'Brien. Jordan.
Actually, it's a comment, Jeff. So you get to hear the answer from the horse's mouth. Why my intent is to freeze the taxes at age 65. I represent Washington Square, Society Hill Towers, that I have a lot of older Pennsylvanians who've been very successful in life, worked very hard, were very prudent, and got to a point in their life that they looked at what they had and they said, okay, we can retire. We can live out the rest of our life on what we have. And all of a sudden, the market blew up. And when they thought what they thought was enough to get them through life, is it? So, I think fundamentally, and in parts of Queen Village that I represent, some folks might see a $10,000 property tax increase. $844.44 a month. What I want to make sure is that folks who have done the right thing all their life, when they retire, know that this is what they will put out each and every month. It's just fairness. And that was my intent.
Understood. And City Council is, if these legislation is passed, City Council will have to wrestle with the issue. As the Pew report points out, they talked about the balloon analogy. You squish here and blows out someplace. By giving anything that's given up to make it easier on somebody else is going to require somebody else to pay more taxes. And the thrust of my comments is let City Council and the mayor and this administration, let's decide it locally. Let's have Harrisburg give Philadelphia the tools to do it. Debate this issue, and we'll present our position at council sessions.
Thank you, Sims. Rep. Sims.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Jeff and Paul and Andrew, I want to thank you for joining us. I don't have a question for you, but I want to stress that there's been a lot of talk about what will be considered fair in this process. And I think that your testimony, your involvement is perhaps the most crucial in determining what actually will be fair. We've heard a lot of testimony about dollars and figures and cents, but I think that making sure that the neighborhood associations that are most affected by this are at the table. Jeff, I also want to stress something that you had said earlier, and I'm pleased that we're joined by my colleagues from outside of the Philadelphia delegation. I think it is so important to stress that there is not a member of the State House that would argue that Philadelphia is like the rest of the state. We have a number of unique challenges and oftentimes are not given the tools to address them locally or municipally because we are saddled by statewide legislation. And I think that I want to stress your testimony that these are 4 pieces of legislation that are tailored to Philadelphia to address a problem that is unfortunately very unique to Philadelphia, and I want to commend you for raising the issue that this legislation is indeed very particularly tailored to Philadelphia's problems. So thank you all very much for joining us.
And no more questions from my colleagues, but I do need to state for the record, I need to also thank you all. So I don't know whether or not you prepare, because if you're like me, whenever I'm going to a meeting, particularly a large meeting like that, I always have a meeting before the meeting so we can get prepared for the meeting. If you did, your prep meeting went extremely well, and it came off very well. For Andrew and Paul, the way you sort of separated the sort of fairness, but also the fear, being extremely direct, giving concrete examples, that was awesome for us. And Jeff, are you elected? Have you ever been elected before? Are you sure? Because the way you described an understanding of the politics associated with moving this process along is something that I don't hear often from the general public, and noting that it is not our responsibility as state legislators to do the job of a state legislator and also the job of the council person. Councilman Squilla, with all due respect, you're here, and you can repeat that Sherelle Parker said it. I don't envy members of council who are going to have to decide how you use the tools, but we as members of the Philadelphia delegation and members of the General Assembly want to just provide you with what you need so that you can address the needs of residents from all walks of life in the city of Philadelphia. So let me just say thank you all so very much for your time and for being here. And Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with you and the other members, I think that concludes our hearing. Now, members outside, Madsey, Sonata, Longietti, you all have to come back again. Philadelphians have seen you. They may really like you a lot, so we'll find you and ask you to come back again. Thank you all so much.
They run into each other all the time.